Why do you feel empty after endless scrolling? You pick up your phone for just a moment, just to check something, just to relax, just to take a short break. And then it happens. One video becomes another. One post becomes another. One scroll becomes 10, then 20, then an hour disappears, maybe more. At first, it does not feel serious. You're not doing anything dramatic. You are not partying, not fighting, not making some reckless decision. You are just scrolling quietly, alone, thumb moving, eyes moving, mind half awake. And yet, when it finally stops, something feels wrong. Not always immediately. Sometimes the emptiness arrives softly, a strange flatness, a heaviness, a subtle sense that you just consumed a lot but received very little. You were occupied, but not fulfilled, stimulated, but not nourished, mentally busy, but emotionally hollow. That feeling is becoming more common in modern life. People spend hours consuming content, yet feel more empty afterward, more tired, more restless, more disconnected, more emotionally dual, and many of them do not fully understand why. Because scrolling feels like rest, but often it is not rest. It feels like escape, but it rarely heals what you are escaping from. It feels like connection, but often it leaves you more alone with yourself than before. It feels like entertainment, but sometimes entertainment without limit becomes emotional starvation in another form. This is one of the strangest experiences of the digital age. A person can be endlessly stimulated and deeply unfulfilled at the same time. They can laugh, tap, swipe, react, watch, consume, compare, and keep moving for hours, and still end the day with a sense that something real is missing. Something important has not been touched. Not peace, not meaning, not presence, not human depth. And this is where the emptiness begins. Because endless scrolling does not only take time, it changes your inner state. It floods the mind with novelty but gives the heart very little to hold. It keeps you occupied so that you do not feel alone for a while. But once the stimulation fades, what remains is often not satisfaction. It is emotional residue, mental exhaustion, comparison, numbness, a strange sense that your attention has been spent, but your deeper self is still untouched. That is why this matters. Because many people are no longer just distracted. They are emotionally drained by the very thing they keep turning to for relief. They scroll because they are tired, then become more tired. They scroll because they feel empty, then feel even more empty. They scroll because they do not know what else to do with themselves in the quiet. And over time, this becomes a cycle, a private loop of stimulation and emptiness, consumption and dissatisfaction, escape and return. This is not a small problem because what you repeatedly use for comfort begins shaping your emotional life. And if your main form of relief keeps leaving you more hollow than before, then something deeper needs to be understood. Why does endless scrolling feel so empty? Why does it seem to give so much in the moment and so little afterward? Why does it keep pulling people in, even when they know how bad it often makes them feel? To answer that, we have to look closely at what scrolling really does, not just to your time, but to your emotions, your attention, your nervous system, your inner life. Because the emptiness you feel after endless scrolling is not random. It is a signal that something in your modern digital life is feeding your impulse while starving your deeper human needs. Never before in human history have people had access to so much stimulation with so little effort. You do not have to leave your room. You do not have to speak. You do not have to think deeply. You do not have to create. You do not even have to choose very much. You simply open the app and the feed begins. It entertains you, distracts you, shows you beauty, outrage, humor, tragedy, luxury, advice, updates, trends, comparisons, and endless pieces of other people's lives, all within minutes. All while you do almost nothing except keep moving your thumb. This is why scrolling is so powerful. It asks almost nothing from you while offering constant novelty in return. But that convenience hides the cost. Because many things that deeply nourish human beings require participation. Real rest requires slowing down. Real connection requires presence. Real meaning requires engagement. Real joy often requires depth. Real peace often requires silence. Scrolling usually offers none of those things in a deep form. It gives stimulation without stillness, contact without intimacy, entertainment without satisfaction, movement without direction. And that is why so many people feel emotionally strange after long periods online. not simply distracted, empty. In this video, we will explore why endless scrolling creates that emptiness, how it affects emotions, identity, relationships, and attention, why it becomes such a powerful escape, and what this says about the deeper hunger so many people are carrying in modern life. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss me future videos exploring the hidden emotional costs of modern life. Now let us begin with the most important question. Why does something that feels good in the moment so often leave people feeling worse afterward? Human beings are not built only for stimulation. They are built for meaning, for attachment, for rhythm, for rest, for attention that settles, for experiences that are not only exciting but also nourishing. This is important because the digital world often confuses stimulation with nourishment. It gives the mind a constant stream of input and calls that satisfaction. But the human system is more complicated than that. A person can be highly stimulated and still emotionally hungry. They can consume a huge amount and still feel inwardly empty. Because fullness and stimulation are not the same thing. A loud room is not always a meaningful room. A busy day is not always a satisfying day. A full feed is not always a full life. This is one reason modern digital habits can feel so strange. They are dense with activity, but only often thin in depth. They keep the mind occupied, but do not always feed what human beings actually need most. Things like real connection, coherence, silence, purpose, embodied experience, conversation, reflection, participation, love, contribution, belonging. Endless scrolling offers a kind of counterfeit version of some of these. It mimics connection. It mimics discovery. It mimics participation. It mimics relief. But the deeper layers are often missing, and the body knows it. Their nervous system knows it. Even if the conscious mind cannot fully explain it. That is why people often end a scrolling session with an emotional tone that feels confusing. They were busy, but not fulfilled, filled with input, but not grounded, surrounded by content, but not connected. The deeper reason is this. Human beings need more than stimulation to feel whole. And when stimulation becomes the main thing they consume, emptiness often follows. Because what is deepest in us is not satisfied by novelty alone, it is satisfied by what is real, what is embodied, what is relational, what is meaningful, what is lived. Scrolling keeps you near life's surface. And a person cannot stay at the surface forever without eventually feeling that something deeper has been abandoned. Scrolling feels like relief, but often it is only interruption. One of the reasons people scroll so much is that it offers immediate relief. You feel bored, you scroll. You feel lonely, you scroll. You feel stressed, you scroll. You do not want to think, you scroll. You want to avoid a difficult task, you scroll. You feel emotionally flat, you scroll. This works in the short term because scrolling interrupts the feeling you do not want. It fills the gap, occupies the mind, redirects attention, creates movement, and movement can feel like relief. But interruption is not the same thing as healing. This is the first truth many people miss. Scrolling does not usually solve the feeling underneath, it merely covers it. It distracts you from loneliness, but does not create real closeness. It distracts you from stress, but does not restore your nervous system. It distracts you from boredom, but does not rebuild your relationship with stillness. It distracts you from inner emptiness, but does not fill the life conditions that caused that emptiness. That is why the feeling often returns as soon as the scrolling stops. Sometimes even stronger. Because now, in addition to the original feeling, you also carry the aftertaste of wasted attention, a sense of passivity, a subtle disappointment, a knowledge that time has passed and nothing meaningful was actually touched. This is a painful combination. You wanted relief. What you got was interruption. And interruption can become addictive precisely because it feels helpful for a few moments. The mind learns, I feel bad. Scrolling helps me not feel it for a while. So the loop strengthens. But each return deepens dependence while often leaving the original problem unresolved. That is why so much scrolling ends in emptiness. Because the person was not truly nourished, only interrupted. And a life built around interruption cannot create deep satisfaction. Because the deeper self does not only want escape from discomfort, it wants something real enough to make discomfort meaningful. Scrolling rarely gives that. Endless scrolling floods the mind but starves the inner life. There is a difference between being full and being fed. A person can eat constantly and still be malnourished. The same is true emotionally and mentally. A person can consume content constantly and still feel inwardly starved. Why? Because endless scrolling floods the mind with stimulation, but often gives very little that becomes part of your life in a meaningful way. You see thousands of images, but keep very little. You absorb endless opinions, but integrate almost none of them. You watch moments of beauty, humor, pain, and drama, but most of them pass through you without becoming understanding, wisdom, or real memory. This creates a strange experience. Your attention has been used, but your soul has not been fed. You have been mentally busy, but emotionally undernourished. That is why the emptiness feels so confusing. Was so much content. So why do I feel like I got nothing? Because depth is not created by volume. It is created by contact, by reflection, by meaning, by something staying with you long enough to actually become part of you. Scrolling works against that. It keeps moving too quickly. One image replaces another. One emotion replaces another. One story replaces another. Before anything can fully land, the next thing arrives. This is not nourishment, it is consumption without digestion. And anything consumed without digestion leaves a person strangely unsatisfied. This is why endless scrolling often feels mentally dense, but essentially thin. There's a lot happening, but very little settling, very little transforming, very little becoming real in your inner life. That is how emptiness grows, not because nothing was present, but because too little was absorbed in the way that truly mattered. Scrolling destroys the conditions needed for real rest. A lot of people scroll when they're tired. That makes sense. It feels easy, low effort, passive, available. But passive stimulation is not always rest. This is one of the biggest illusions of digital life. Real rest helps the nervous system settle. It lowers internal noise. It reduces mental switching. It allows the body and mind to recover. Scrolling often does the opposite. It keeps the eyes moving, the mind reacting, the emotions shifting, the attention jumping. their nervous system stimulated. Even if you are physically ill, the inside of you may remain very active. That is why a person can spend an hour lying down with their phone and still feel strangely unrested afterward. They were not working in the traditional sense, but, but they were not deeply resting either. They were being stimulated in a low grade but constant way. This creates exhaustion without restoration. And that kind of exhaustion can feel especially empty because now the person has given time to something they hoped would replenish them, but it did not. It merely occupied them until the hour disappeared. That can create quiet sadness, not dramatic sadness, just a subtle feeling that life keeps getting used up by activities that do not truly return anything lasting. This matters because people need real forms of restoration. Silence, walking, sleep, conversation, prayer, music, nature, stillness, breathing room, presence with people, unhurried meals, unfilled times. These things may seem less exciting than scrolling, but they often nourish much more deeply. And the more people lose contact with real rest, the more they start mistaking stimulation for recovery. That confusion becomes expensive because a person who keeps using scrolling as rest often becomes more depleted while they believing they are relaxing. Scrolling keeps you near everyone and connected to almost no one. The digital world creates a strange kind of closeness. You see faces, stories, voices, homes, meals, thoughts, confessions, life updates. You know what people are doing, where they are going, what they bought, what they think, who they love, what they fear. It feels like proximity, and in one sense, it is. But it is often not intimacy. This is the emotional trap. A person can be surrounded by signals of human life and still feel profoundly alone. Why? Because human connection is not built only from visibility, it is built from reciprocity, from presence, from being known and knowing another person in return, from shared time, shared attention, shared vulnerability. Scrolling gives you access to people's surfaces, sometimes even very emotional surfaces, but not necessarily the mutual depth that makes loneliness soften. That is why people can finish scrolling feeling more alone than before. They saw many people, but were with almost no one. They consumed social energy, but did not participate in real connection. This leaves an emptiness that is hard to name because the person was around signs of life. And yet, their deeper need for a relationship was not truly met. In fact, it may have grown sharper. Now, they not only feel alone, they also feel the contrast between their own private reality and the endless stream of other people's visible lives. That contrast can become painful, especially at night, especially in hard seasons, especially when someone is already feeling unseen. This is one reason endless scrolling often leaves emotional emptiness behind. It offers the feeling of social contact without the nourishment of actual connection. An imitation connection cannot satisfy a relational hunger for very long. Comparison turns consumption into quite self rejection. Scrolling is not neutral, it is often filled with comparison. Even when the person does not consciously intend it, they see beauty, success, travel, money, bodies, relationships, confidence, style, discipline, popularity, achievement, and the mind starts measuring, sometimes softly, sometimes painfully. Am I behind? Why don't I look like that? Why does my life feel smaller? Why am I so tired when they look so alive? Why does everyone else seem to be moving while I feel stuck? This creates a dangerous emotional shift. The feed stops being just content. It becomes a mirror that distorts self worth. And even if the person knows the images are curated, filtered, edited, selective, or performative, the emotional effect can still remain because the nervous system responds before a full intellectual analysis does. It feels the contrast, and repeated contrast can become shame or envy or quite self rejection. That is exhausting because now scrolling is not only occupying attention, it is eroding inner peace. The person begins living the experience with a weaker relationship to themselves, less gratitude, less groundedness, less acceptance. That contributes powerfully to emptiness. Because emptiness is not only the absence of stimulation, sometimes it is the absence of self connection after too much comparison has been absorbed. A person scrolls looking for relief. Instead, They end up feeling less satisfied with their own face, body, life, work, progress, or relationships. That is a brutal trait. And because it happens repeatedly, it slowly teaches the mind to associate ordinary life with insufficiency. Now, real life starts feeling dual compared to the feed. The self starts feeling inadequate compared to the feed. And emptiness grows because the person becomes less able to inhabit their own life with peace. Endless scrolling weakens your sense of agency. There's another reason scrolling feels empty. It is passive. Not always completely passive, but mostly. You are not building much, not creating much, not participating deeply, not choosing with strong intention. You are receiving, absorbing, reacting, moving on. This matters because human beings need some sense of agency to feel alive. They need to act, shape, respond meaningfully, make choices that have weight, create something, contribute something, move towards something. When too much of life becomes passive consumption, a person can start feeling strangely powerless. Not in a dramatic political sense, in a personal sense. Like life is happening past them rather than through them. Like their attention is always being used, but not always by them. Like they're watching much more than they are living. That feeling creates emptiness because passivity rarely produces deep fulfillment. Even entertainment needs limits if a person wants to keep feeling like a participant in their own life. Without participation, there's often no real satisfaction, only temporary occupation. This is one reason people can spend hours online and then feel vaguely disappointed in themselves afterward. Not always because the content was terrible, but because they know somewhere inside that they were not living. They were consuming others people's lives, ideas, aesthetics, arguments, and moments while their own life sat waiting. That waiting becomes painful over time because the deeper self wants to move, to build, to choose, to matter. And endless scrolling often delays all of that. It keeps a person mentally active enough to avoid change and passive enough to postpone life. That is a perfect recipe for emptiness. Scrolling makes the present moment feel less enough. Another hidden cost of endless scrolling is what it does to the present. It makes ordinary reality feel less insufficient, less stimulating, less beautiful, less intense, less interesting, because the feed is always curated for impact. The best angles, the strongest opinions, the most dramatic stories, the funniest clips, the most idealized moments. Over time, this trains the brain to expect life to hit harder than real life naturally does. But real life is slower, quieter, more uneven, more subtle. It contains repetition, waiting, ordinary light, ordinary faces, ordinary silence, ordinary effort. That is not a flaw. That is reality. But once a person becomes too conditioned by high frequency stimulation, ordinary reality starts feeling emotionally weaker. Now, a quiet meal feels less engaging. A normal afternoon feels empty. A walk without a podcast feels strange. A room without a screen feels too still. This is serious because much of life's real value lives in ordinary moments. If the person loses the ability to feel the sufficiency of those moments, they lose contact with a major source of peace. Now they need stronger and stronger stimulation just to avoid feeling underfed. That is not freedom. That is dependency. And dependency on stimulation creates emptiness because the world outside the screen can no longer easily satisfy the nervous system. The person is surrounded by life, but less able to feel it. That is the strange tragedy of modern scrolling. Not just that it consumes time, but that it can slowly weakens the capacity to feel present life as enough. The emptiness is often a signal of a deeper hunger. Perhaps the most important truth is this. The emptiness after endless scrolling is often not only about the scrolling itself, it is about what the scrolling is trying to replace. People scroll because something in them wants relief, or comfort, or escape, or company, or stimulation, or numbness, or hope, or simply not to feel what they are feeling for a while. This means the emptiness afterward is something's a signal that the real need went unmet. The person wanted rest but got stimulation, wanted comfort but got comparison, wanted connection but got visibility, wanted meaning but got novelty, wanted to feel alive but got distraction. That mismatch creates emptiness. And until the person starts naming the deeper hunger correctly, the cycle will often continue. They will keep reaching for the feed to solve a need the feed cannot actually satisfy. A need for rest, belonging, touch, direction, purpose, embodied joy, silence, healing, a slower mind, a truer life. This is why endless scrolling can feel almost tragic. Not because the person is weak, but because they are using a shallow tool to answer a deep hunger. And deep hunger never stays quiet forever. It keeps speaking through emptiness, through restlessness, through fatigue, through loneliness, through the strange sadness that appears after hours of consumption. That sadness is not meaningless. It may be the soul's way of saying, "This is not what I really needed." The problem of endless scrolling is larger than wasted time. It changes emotional life. It teaches people to seek relief through interruption instead of restoration. It trains them to tolerate shallow stimulation more easily than deep presence. It normalizes passivity. It weakens solitude. It turns attention into a marketplace. And perhaps most dangerously, it makes many people less able to tell the difference between being occupied and being fulfilled. That confusion matters because if a culture loses that distinction, it becomes easier and easier to keep people endlessly engaged while they can quietly grow more hollow, more distracted, more numb, more lonely, more dependent on systems that give them the temporary relief while taking deeper vitality away. This has consequences for mental health, for relationships, for creativity, for spiritual life, for identity, for what people are willing to call a good day. If a good day becomes a day of easy distraction instead of a day of meaningful living, then standards fall. Not loudly, quietly. And quiet decline is often the most dangerous kind. That is why the subject matters. Because the emptiness after endless scrolling is not a random mood. It may be the one of the clearest signs that modern life is offering enormous stimulation while failing to nourish what is most human in us. You feel empty after endless scrolling because scrolling gives you movement without your arrival, noise without peace, stimulation without nourishment, visibility without intimacy, relief without healing. occupation without meaning. It fills your attention, but often leaves your deeper needs untouched. Is why the emptiness feels so real, because something real is missing. Not content, not novelty, not another video. Something deeper, a slower mind, a more present body, a truer kind of rest, a life that you are actually participating in, a relationship that is mutual, a moment that is instead of watched, a form of comfort that does not leave you feeling more hollow afterward. This does not mean all scrolling is evil. It does not mean every moment online is destructive, but endless, unconscious, emotionally driven scrolling often carries a cost that people feel long before they fully understand it. That cost is not only time, it is inner texture, clarity, peace, aliveness, and perhaps that is why the feeling afterward matters so much. Because emptiness is often a message that says, you were distracted, but not fed. You were entertained, but not restored. You were occupied, but not fulfilled. And if you listen carefully, that message can become useful because it can lead you back to the deeper question: what do I actually need when I reach for the screen? Not what distracts me, what nourishes me, not what interrupts the discomfort, what heals it, not what fills the moment, what fills the life. That is the real question. And until a person begins answering that question more honestly, the scroll will keep offering a counterfeit form of relief while the emptiness keeps returning. That is why you feel empty after endless scrolling. Not because you are broken, but because what is deepest you cannot be fed by endless fragments. It needs something slower, truer, more human, more real. So, what do you think endless scrolling is really stealing from people the most? Their peace? Their attention? Their relationships? Their self worth? Or their ability to feel satisfied with their real life? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, do not forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next deep dive into the hidden emotional cost of modern life. Because some of the biggest struggles today do not look dramatic from the outside. They happen quietly behind a screen.